Okay. I'm Donald Nace. I'm an ex-Mobile employee, having retired a year and a half ago after 38 years of service. I started with Mobile in 1949 after getting a BS in Chem Engineering and an MS in Chemistry from Lehigh University. When I got my master's degree, I did work on catalysis of the polymerization of oil in printing inks. And when I was interviewed by Mobile and talked to a number of people, I was very impressed with the work of Charlie Plank and Leonard Drake in catalysis of catalytic cracking. So when I started working with Charlie and Leonard, doing work on really the kinetics of cracking over amorphous silica aluminum. After 4 years at Mobile, I was fortunate in getting awarded the Mobile Fellowship. Went back to Penn State and decided to get a PhD in chemistry, and worked with Dr. Aston in cryogenics, really in studying low temperature phenomena of inorganic materials. So when I came back to Mobile, I was of course very interested in the structure of catalytic materials. And I worked again in catalytic cracking, not for Charlie or Leonard anymore, but I worked for other people that were more on the more practical engineering aspects of it. And that's where I started to get involved with the kinetics, the early initial kinetics of catalytic cracking, and built a microreactor and got some early data on the rates at the first microseconds of catalytic cracking. And from this work, I got involved in the mechanisms involved in catalytic cracking and did a little work along this lines. Eventually, I got more into the engineering aspects as the more fundamental work was being phased out, and all of the oil industry was more interested in immediate uses of inventions. And since that time, I worked with pilot plants and catalysts, with the new zeolite catalysts, and developing models, kinetic models, with Vern Wheatman particularly, on catalytic cracking. And these models led to Mobile's very useful models for catalytic cracking, which they use today.
How did you come to use a microreactor?
I was pretty much working on my own and didn't have any particular job that I had to do, any particular avenues I was to pursue, and I just was interested in how fast, particularly since the new zeolites were involved and since the coke laydown was such a vast difference between that with the amorphous catalyst, and I was very interested in the relative rates of coking and in catalytic cracking. So I just decided I had to find a way with gas chromatography. It was very obvious that in order to get early rates, you had to use pulses, or you had to have some way of trapping materials immediately after the reaction started. So that's how I built the microreactor. Published a few papers on that.
And how did you get to working with Vern Wheatman?
Well, I guess that when that work was over, Vern had just come back from also getting a PhD in chem engineering, and he was involved with a new group on systems research, and they needed a chemist in the group. They needed someone with their models, besides engineers, that was more knowledgeable on the mechanisms. They wanted to make their models kinetic rather than variable. And so Vern asked me if I would be in the group, and I went into that group and was working with mostly all engineers that were working on modeling.
And now that you have retired?
Now that I've retired, I have very little interest in catalysis. I had spent 38 years, and I wanted to pursue new things. I always loved music, and I always played the piano. I used to play clarinet in symphonies, and also used to play tenor sax in dance bands. So I just decided I wanted to be with people, but I didn't want to be involved with science anymore. So I'm really almost a full-time musician. Not for profit, but just for fun. I play in 4 different bands. I'm studying clarinet under a professor at Glasgow University, and I'm spend all my time and really enjoy music.